Today's news talk and the voice of freedom.
That's what this country's all about.
TNT Radio.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to this live broadcast. We're in hour number 2 here at TNT, Today's News Talk. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Great to have you with us. And we're going to be joined in a few minutes by a fantastic independent journalist. You'll know him. He's been on the show many times. Also a State Department correspondent, Sam Husseini. He's got his finger on the pulse of what's going on in Foggy Bottom. But there's other disturbing news which we're going to have to cover as well. Sam's going to be able to share with us. And that is the harassment of a best-selling author, a great historian, Israeli. He's an academic. He's been with Exeter University in the UK, top institutions. Ilan Pappé was apparently, according to a recent post on social media, was harassed by the FBI while he was in transit in the United States, asking him all sorts of questions about his views, as if you need to ask Ilan Pappé what his views are. He's one of the preeminent scholars on Palestinian and Israeli history. I mean, unbelievable. Is this where we're at? We'll talk to Sam Husseini about that in a few minutes when we connect him. We might not be able to connect Tony Gosling, unfortunately, this week. We're going to have to push that segment back, maybe to Monday, perhaps. But anyway, we'll be in touch with Tony nonetheless with a great Bilderberg 2024 preview. We're looking forward to that. Tony has got a great line on Bilderberg. He's one of the best people, most consistent people covering Bilderberg for years, ever since it was outed as a confab. Tony's been really one of the stalwarts of that issue, and I want to definitely bring him on to get an update on that. But that's one of the big issues. We'll talk to Sam Husseini about that. I think we're going to bring him on the line just momentarily. We'll get him on the live link. But there's that issue, and then there's also a conversation, an interesting conversation about Zionist extremism. And where does this come from? Where does this emanate from? The roots of it, the horrors that we've seen, the violence in Gaza at the hands of the Israeli occupation forces. What is motivating it? Is there an ideological or religious motivation or impetus there that's not being talked about that is clear and present? Maybe we'll shed some light on that with Sam Husseini, but we'll bring him onto the call on the split screen as soon as he's available. But right now, the situation in the Middle East, in Gaza, continues to be dire. We're looking at a major crisis in terms of excess deaths, in terms of starvation. This is an incredible situation. It's unprecedented that the world has been allowed to see something like this happen and allowed to just persist for now. We'll be into the 8th month when we get to June. I mean, that's pretty unbelievable in itself. 8 months of this, no ceasefire, no resumption of aid deliveries through Rafah, pre-October 7th levels, talking about 400 articulated lorries or semi-trucks, as they call them in the U.S., per day, delivering food staples, medical equipment, provisions, absolutely essential. It's been basically a full siege. So anyway, we're still trying to connect Sam Husseini. We'll do that momentarily. But that is the situation right now in the Middle East. It is absolutely horrific. I don't really know how much more the people in that region can take, but it is a very, very bad precedent that's being set. And one can only suspect that there are plans afoot that they're not being told to the public, at least to the American public or the public in the West, that the U.S. government are somewhat in cahoots with the Israeli government to execute a plan that probably involves moving a lot of native Palestinians out of Gaza. I think we've got Sam Husseini on the line right now. Sam, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, Patrick. Thank you.
It's great to have you with us as well. I mean, right off the top, Sam, I saw your post about Ilan Pappé. I think we might have a screenshot of this. I mean, if this is indeed the case, Sam, this is very disturbing. You're talking about one of the preeminent historians on Palestine and Israel here, an award-winning author, a best-selling author, an academic. What do you make of this?
It's very interesting. I mean, it's the type of thing that a lot of, Arabs and Muslims have been subjected to in terms of, searches and questioning at airports and so on. I don't recall in North America, this is an Israeli citizen being subjected to this based purely, apparently, on his political statements. And they're trying to paint him as some kind of, agent of Hamas or something like this. It very much seems to fit into a general, rubric of an attack on the First Amendment that we have seen accelerate in recent months against university students, increased surveillance passing through the U.S. Congress. There's bills in the works to target nonprofit organizations and their status if they don't, if they seriously question the line. We've seen for years attacks on free speech rights of people asserting boycott, divestment, sanctions. So this seems to be, part of a whole thread of attacks on freedom of speech in, finding people wherever they're vulnerable. And somebody like an eminent historian like Ilan Pappé, if he's traveling, and then he, has to get hassled every time he travels and be disparaged and so on. It seemed it certainly reeks of an attempt to intimidate somebody like that.
The thing that's disturbing about this, you may or may not agree, Sam, but someone like Ilan Pappé or anybody like him, I mean, he's an Israeli. Whatever his opinion is, whatever his views are on what's happening in Gaza, or more broadly the issue of Israel, has zero effect on U.S. national security. If the FBI is the top law enforcement agency in the United States, there's no crimes being committed there. One can only deduce here, Sam, that they're trying to connect anybody questioning the Israeli narrative as being somehow in league with Hamas, or somebody who is in touch with real Palestinians in Gaza is somehow in league with Hamas, ergo they are cavorting with terrorists. This can be the only reason I could see that the FBI would be interested or taking action like this. Is that what we're looking at here?
Well, I mean, Congress just stipulated that anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism. And so anyone who articulates an anti-Zionist point of view, as Ilan Pappé does, in a very scholarly and methodical way, therefore becomes suspect of potential hate crimes and backing terrorist organizations and so on. So you see the United States of America, the alleged flagship of free speech and expression in the First Amendment, undermining those things and creating speech crimes. And I think that this is sort of, has deep roots in both the left and the right in terms of restricting speech and the undermining of the First Amendment. And we see it now coming more and more to a culmination where a scholar working on an issue is deemed to, in effect, be an opponent of U.S. policy and therefore targetable.
And I might add, I highly recommend the books of Ilan Pappé. He's a great historian. He lays out a very compelling timeline of events that I think everybody should read, and is in fact on the curriculum of many universities' book lists as well for undergraduate work. So I think this will be good for his book sales, no doubt. He's getting more credibility as the day goes on, Sam, on this. Now, you're talking about this criminalizing of speech, and a crazy scene in the U.S. House of Representatives recently. I've got a clip I want to share with you, whereby they're bringing Harvard students to testify. So as the Republican House members are really devoting a lot of time to this right now in Congress, they feel this is a priority, that the Kristallnacht will break out in Cambridge, Massachusetts, if we don't do something about this scourge of anti-Semitism on campuses in America. I might be sounding hyperbolic here, but let's play this clip and tell us what you think about this. Go ahead and roll it.
Rebroyer's youngest daughter, my great-great-aunt, vividly recalls praying from the Book of Psalms while her father was arrested by the Nazi Gestapo, and their historic Breuer synagogue in Frankfurt completely burnt to the ground on the night of Kristallnacht. As one of the very last Jews to flee Nazi persecution in Germany, my family found home in the United States of America, where they were able to rebuild and sustain their Jewish identity. My story of anti-Semitism, therefore, is deeply painful and it is deeply personal. Members, Kristallnacht did not begin with burning books or broken windows. Kristallnacht did not begin with destroyed synagogues nor expulsions. Kristallnacht began with the acceptance, the normalization, and the celebration of Jew hatred. Members of this committee, I appear before you with an urgent warning. The treatment of Jewish Americans on college campuses across this country, and in particular at Harvard University, is nothing short of a national emergency. It is blatantly anti-Semitic, it is frighteningly discriminatory, and it is deeply un-American. It's not that Jewish students don't feel safe at Harvard. Jewish students are not safe at Harvard. And until Harvard implements any type of accountability, responsibility, or policies to combat anti-Semitism, then all of these Jewish schools and synagogues and communities should not allow Harvard admission recruiters within 50 feet of their school or 50 feet of their child. It is completely unacceptable what Jews are facing at Harvard in 2024 in the United States of America.
When was that from?
That's a congressional hearing, I think this week. So, yeah. So this is happening in Washington. So this is a student, I believe, from apparently grad student from Harvard. His name is Mr. Kestenbaum. And he's basically saying there is a major anti-Semitism problem at Harvard and that something should be done about this. Otherwise, it's going to lead to another Kristallnacht. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think it would be. I have not followed this. I bet it would be profitable to dig into who these particular individuals are and what their ties are to various organizations that seek to peddle this nonsense for political ends. I think that would be a useful thing for someone out there to do. It's funny, this sort of like, living in, pretending that we're in 1935 Germany kind of thing, is a way of getting people to not perceive the reality and what is happening in 2024 Gaza right now. It is to attempt to use, memory as a way of a mechanism of not seeing reality, and it's kind of what actually caused anti-Jewish hatred. Because people were so tied up with the passion of the Christ, and the passion plays and so on and so forth, that they could and things like that, so that they could either go on crusades or dispense hatred towards Jews. So it's exactly the opposite, effectively, of what they're arguing. They're attempting to, it's obviously a concerted effort to shield Israel's genocidal rampage against the people of Gaza, now in full force into Rafah, the last so-called safe area in Gaza, with hundreds of thousands of people being moved, being forced to move once again, so that people don't perceive that reality, and that this is just a way of, the thief crying, thief, thief, so that you don't perceive who the actual thief is. This is a canard that my dad was always fond of telling me, that you have to watch out for. It's particularly in contrast. I don't know if you want to get into it, Patrick. I watched the South Africa case today, which was quite compelling, and very much grounded in the actual reality as to what's happening in Gaza right now.
On the South Africa case, Sam, there's also noises being made by countries like Egypt to give their support to the South African effort there. Other countries are starting to be more vocal on this. So where is the ICJ legal effort at right now, Sam?
Sure. Well, today what happened was that South Africa put together a very powerful 2-hour presentation where they went through the law and the facts as to what's happening, how Israel is now going after the last place in Gaza, as they depicted it, that Rafah, without Rafah, they're alerting the court, it may become virtually impossible for Palestinians to reconstitute Gaza in any meaningful way, because there's no safe place for human habitation. And they excoriated the court to issue stronger and clearer orders, and that Israel was in brazen violation of the court's previous orders, but that more direct statements from the court were desperately needed, and that for the credibility of not only the court but of the concept of international law, the court must be direct. So it was a fairly impressive presentation. The South Africans had their full team there, who were all very capable. Today, the Israelis only had 2 or 3 people at their table. I don't know if that'll change when they speak tomorrow, but I don't know if that portends that the Israelis will just simply won't put up much of a defense. And people may not be aware of how significant South Africa's moves are, given the possible ramifications of, and I know we've discussed this before, of getting beyond the Security Council. That is, the U.S. veto has basically hindered any meaningful resolution of international law. And we may be coming to a head in terms of the entire structure of the international law system of confronting that impediment to peaceful resolution of disputes between nations as outlined by the UN Charter. The General Assembly can and should meet under Uniting for Peace. This could well pose an opportunity for activists in New York and other places to directly confront the United Nations. The U.S., in terms of its illegitimate use of its veto, and other states to do all that they truly can do. States are not doing all that they can do. Virtually the only countries that have really, put themselves out there are South Africa and Nicaragua by going before the ICJ. Other states have said that they're going to the ICJ, and I think a few have, but most haven't. Most have said that they will. Jordan said that it would months ago. It has not done so. Egypt, as you alluded to, recently said it would do so. It has not yet done so. As of yesterday, I checked the ICJ webpage yesterday for that. So these countries, and many of them went to the International Criminal Court months and months ago, as people might recall, in November, maybe even October. And at the time, I was saying this is a useless effort because we know that the ICC, it's not a useless effort. I'm for it, that people should do it. But let's not fool ourselves. The International Criminal Court is itself a criminal court. It is, it has not done anything for the Palestinians, or it has been used as an instrument of U.S. And NATO policy. It goes after African rulers that the U.S. doesn't like, and it goes after Putin. So the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which deals with nations and not individuals, has been a minimally reasonable institution and should be used as such. And I think that's what South Africa is doing. The coverage of it today has been quite minimal. The coverage that I saw in South Africa was quite optimistic about about the court coming down strongly for a demand for Israel to cease its attack on Rafah, if not in general, in Gaza. We'll see if that happens. If it does, then a lot of nations need to really coordinate and think strategically about how they will use that at the UN, and to ensure that the US veto is so completely discredited, along with civil society movements around the world, that it actually creates a rupture in the international system, so that it is no longer business as usual, where the U.S. ambassador can just put up their hands and that's the end of the story, and that international law is not implemented.
So one thing a lot of commentators have been talking about, Sam, in this week, is that by seizing the Rafah border crossing, Israel is in direct contravention of the Camp David Accords. Now, think of that in terms of Israeli-Egyptian relations. That's a real sort of keystone, isn't it, of stability between these two countries. The United States is meant to be the guarantor of that agreement. It's my understanding of it. Do you think there's a potential crisis brewing here between Israel and Egypt over this issue?
It's quite possible. It is possible that the U.S. establishment and Israeli establishment endgame is to attempt to shred all vestige of international law and past agreements. Right. Israel's got nukes and nobody else does. And so, Egypt does have, chemical and biological weapons. I'm quite certain of that. So there's some kind of deterrent there. But in terms of if Israel really wants to go full insane here, and maybe not insane, but full monomaniacal here, and if the U.S. wants that, if the U.S. actually wants to not be constrained by even the presumption of international law, like thus far the U.S. has instrumentalized international law. It uses it when it's useful, and it ignores it when it wants to. That's what the U.S. establishment does. But part of the leverage that they have there is the possibility that they actually want to destroy it, including past agreements, like Camp David and so on. We saw Trump get out of the Iran deal, and then we saw Biden and Blinken not wanting to reopen the Iran deal. They wanted to shred that instrument of agreement. How far are Israel and the United States establishment willing to go on that is very much an open question to me.
And I'm with Sam Husseini right now. He is an independent journalist, commentator. He's also an independent correspondent at the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. Sam, if you can hang with us after the break, you posted something a few days ago on Twitter, which I really want to get your comment on, about a piece by Walid Khalidi. He is nearly 100 years old, and he wrote something I think that was very profound. Sam, I think you've made, a very compelling argument. Well, South Africa's made a very compelling argument as to what we're looking at being a plausible genocide in Gaza. But I think what you're saying is there's a major crisis in international law, international governance. I think that's on par with what we saw looking back at the Second World War and the failure of the League of Nations. This created a huge crisis and an impetus to construct a new array of institutions after the war to prevent what happened from happening again. And here we go, Sam, it's happening again. I think history will look back. If this escalates into a wider conflict, people are going to be studying how it got to this point. And I think the points that you're making here about this being that crucial, and South Africa's case potentially being ignored, you have the potential, delegitimization of all international governance over this issue, Sam. I don't think that's a hyperbolic statement there. I think that's how history would look at it if things escalate to World War III. And your final thoughts on this issue, and then I want to go to the item we were talking about before the break, the piece by Walid Khalidi, which is directly relating to this. But your final thoughts on this. Is this on par with the failure of the League of Nations to restrain the problems that led to World War II?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the failure of the League of Nations in terms of how, long that took, but this has been a long time coming in terms of the machinations around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I view Israeli-Palestinian conflict as central because it is the last strain of European settler colonialism. And therefore, it may provide the impetus to revive the entire endeavor more broadly in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. We see NATO, for example, has operated now. NATO, which was supposed to protect Europe against Russia, against the Soviet Union, which doesn't exist anymore, has projected power the last 15, 20 years in Asia, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Africa, and it now has affiliates in Latin America. So the threat vis-a-vis the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think, is genuine in terms of a revival of the possibility of a revival of settler colonialism. I also view the entire structure of recent history as helping lead us to this point. That is, the U.S. Helping to instigate other wars further deteriorated international law, provoking Russia's invasion of Ukraine, for example, further corroded the system of international law. The entire rhetoric coming out of the US of saying a rules-based order rather than a law-based order was an attempt to corrode notions of international law so that they can either instrumentalize it or dispense with it when they don't want to and threaten to destroy it.
No, and a lot of people have recognized this, especially in the last year or so. It's now coming under heavy criticism, that whole concept of the rules-based international order. We heard this talking point for years, and people are trying to make sense of what it actually meant. Now we can kind of see that. You've laid that out very well, Sam. But also, I want to point to, just relating to this, you put a post on X, Twitter. You're talking about a piece by Walid Khalidi. You said he's nearly 100 years old. He just wrote a piece entitled Harass, and he's talking about the merciless pulverization of Gaza now in its sixth, seventh month, and has nothing to do with self-defense. This is quite a profound piece and quite a profound take on what we're witnessing, and goes a long way to explain what we've seen and why. Sam, if you would like to elaborate a little bit more on this, we'd really appreciate it.
Sure. And just by way of background, people might not be familiar with Walid Khalidi. I mean, he was I remember hearing about him when I was a kid. He was one of the first people I ever saw on U.S. media articulating the Palestinian point of view in anything resembling an articulate fashion. He wrote several books, some of them encyclopedic in nature, for example, documenting all of the villages that were destroyed in the 1948 war, which I think he tallied at 418 towns and villages that were destroyed by Zionist forces in 1947-48. And he wrote several other highly consequential books about Israel and the Palestinians. This most recent, and I assumed that he had died. So I was delighted when somebody mentioned to me that they saw a recent piece by him, and it took some digging to find that piece, but I did. and I was delighted. I couldn't figure out if he was 98 or 99, but he's very close to 100 years old. And that piece, what it basically, it sort of digs deeper when people quote Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders saying Amalek to treat Palestinians in Gaza like Amalek. They must. What's basically being said there, in apparently, I didn't know this, in classical, Jewish jurisprudence, there are two types of wars: wars of choice and wars of annihilation. And Harem refers to the latter. And that is actually what's going on, and that's what's being invoked in Israeli society, that this is a war of annihilation. He even quotes, in the 1980s, you had the horrific Israeli war in Lebanon, and at the time it was depicted by Menachem Begin, the previously probably the most right-wing Israeli prime minister, that was a war of choice, and that killed over 20,000 people. Well, this is in a different category. This is a war of annihilation, and we see that, and we saw that today in the presentation by South Africa, where they played clips of Israeli soldiers, going on a shouting rampage all together. Well, we are going to destroy Rafah, destroy Rafah, destroy Rafah. The soldiers basically getting their marching orders from their political so-called leadership.
And it kind of goes a long way, I think, to explain, there's an ideological component here. There's a religious component that goes even deeper. You're talking about the motivation behind this. Clearly, what we've seen, this is a war of annihilation. I think there's no other way to describe it, Sam. The scenes that we're seeing are apocalyptic. They're unprecedented. The complete leveling of densely populated areas. I mean, we're not talking about even the bombing of Raqqa and Mosul, which they gave time to evacuate, and this was supposedly to flush out ISIS. But looking at the scene in Gaza at the hands of the Israeli military, this is almost the kind of a level of extremism that's motivating this war of annihilation. When you take into the account the religious connotations of this overtones, Sam, this is kind of an extremist war of annihilation that's being waged. There's something deep here, I think, that goes to the core of the current iteration of Israeli society, of the institution of the IDF, the current coalition, the Likud coalition in power, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, and the far right wing components of that. This is it's not just a reaction to what, quote, Hamas did on October 7th. There's something much deeper and more profound at play here. And I think this goes a long way also to explain why a lot of other Western countries and political leaders are having a problem dealing with this issue or challenging Israel. It seems like Israel is on a scorched earth mission here in Palestine. That's what it feels like. This is what it looks like, and I think this concept of harem kind of goes a long way to explain what's at play here. This is extraordinary if you think about it. If that's indeed, Sam, what we are witnessing. But got a couple of minutes left. I'll give you the floor for the final part of this segment. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, no, I think that's very very good, Patrick. I mean, what people have said for some time, I think, is true, that Hamas is the excuse, genocide is the tool, ethnic cleansing is the goal. And in terms of the deep religious structure behind this, I mean, I've observed for some time that it is a long-standing vantage point to use the Old Testament as an excuse for ethnic cleansing. That was explicitly used by U.S. settlers that we are in effect Israel now, and that is how we have to treat the Native Americans. The way that the Israelites in the Bible treated all of the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. And so we see that same structure of settler colonialism sort of boomerang, come full circle from having been used by the people instigating genocide and ethnic cleansing of native populations in, for example, the Americas, and effectively coming back to Israel. And it makes sense because you do have Christian Zionists, for example. You do have all of these associations between Jewish Zionists and Christian Zionists who are in effect colluding to perpetuate this latest stage of the imperial project. And what's remarkable about it is the speed of it, given their technological capacities. They're using AI, they're using drones, they're using all manner of weaponry, and that in spite of the fact that it's being beamed at least on some platforms across the world, and the international community, the so-called international community, is not taking the measures necessary to stop it.
That is a really interesting concept. You've just shown there that it has gone full circle. If you think about it, a lot of the major political figures came from via America, including Benjamin Netanyahu himself at one point, and the United States military, our weapons, our hardware, our jets, our ammunition, our full support from the Pentagon. So it has come full circle all the way back to what you say is the last sort of European settler colonial project, Israel. Incredible. If you look at it in those terms, Sam, from that sort of broad perspective, it helps to make sense, I think, of what people are looking at. People are desperate to make sense of what they're looking at here over the last 8 months. It is absolutely unprecedented. It's horrific, dare I say, Sam. It's biblical on so many different levels. And I think it's important that we pay attention to some of these wiser, older individuals and figures like Walid Khalidi as well. And thank you for bringing that to our attention. Much appreciated. Sam Husseini, independent journalist, also independent correspondent, State Department. Follow Sam's work on Substack and follow him on X, Twitter. Sam, we really appreciate you joining us again this week on TNT.
Thank you, Patrick. Be well.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Sam Husseini. Again, follow Sam and what he's doing on social media. We are following him as well as other fantastic guests like Tariq, Cyril, Emar in the first hour. We'll reschedule our talk with Tony Gosling for next week with a Bilderberg preview for 2024. I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully we'll be able to catch Tony maybe on Monday or Tuesday. We're on chatting with him right now on the back line. But thank you guys for joining us here this week. This has been a fantastic hour or two today. Try to top what we did yesterday. That's our goal, to be better than we were the day before. We hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope you're informed. And with any luck, we hope you're just a little bit entertained to boot. Take care, you guys. All the best. We'll see you next time.